I grew up in a small town with quiet streets and rows of cookie-cutter houses, each with its own manicured lawn. In that tidy world, my younger brother Derek and I spent our childhood racing bikes and playing catch in the fading light of summer evenings. As kids, we were inseparable. He always looked up to me, and I felt an older brother pride whenever I guided him through life's little challenges. He'd fall off his bike, skin his knee, and I'd be there with a band-aid. If he got stuck on a math problem, I'd sit with him until we solved it. That was the foundation of our bond, an unspoken promise that we'd look out for each other, no matter what. It never occurred to me that one day, that bond would snap under the weight of a betrayal that I never saw coming. When we reached our teens, the dynamic between us shifted. Derek became confident, almost cocky. He had this effortless charisma that drew people in, while I was more reserved, more inclined to stand back and observe. Sometimes I envied how easily he made friends, how he seemed to leap into every situation without fear. Still, despite those differences in our personalities, we maintained a steady relationship. Sure, we bickered about who got the car on Saturday night or which of us would have to mow the lawn, but we always made up. During those years, I never once thought he would be capable of something unforgivable. Even when our competition grew sharper, over sports, grades, or approval from our parents, the idea that Derek might hurt me one day on a deeper level was unimaginable. In our early 20s, Derek set off to travel the world. He'd saved some money from odd jobs and had this dream of backpacking across Europe. My parents supported him, proud of his courage and sense of adventure. I felt a mixture of admiration and envy. I, too, wanted to see the world, but I was stuck in an unfulfilling job, paying off a used car, trying to navigate adulthood. Derek's sporadic postcards arrived from faraway places with exotic names, each describing breathtaking views, vibrant cultures, and the freedom he felt exploring foreign lands. Part of me cheered him on, while another part whispered that I was standing still as my brother leaped forward in life. Yet I convinced myself that my turn would come. I just needed a bit more time, a little more money, or maybe just the right partner to inspire me. I met Emily at a community fundraiser. It was one of those warm summer evenings where everyone wore light clothing and sipped on cheap lemonade while pretending they were there for altruistic reasons. She stood behind a table adorned with homemade crafts, chatting enthusiastically about the local families who would benefit from the donations. There was something refreshingly genuine about her. She had kind eyes, a warm smile, and an easy laughter that cut through the usual small talk that surrounded us. I walked over, bought a bracelet I didn't need, and tried to come up with some clever line. Instead, I ended up stuttering a bit. But she laughed kindly and put me at ease, as if my awkwardness was endearing rather than embarrassing. We spoke for an hour that first night, lost in conversation about everything from the local music scene to her dreams of one day opening an art studio. She showed me pictures on her phone of the paintings she'd completed, all infused with bright colors and swirling patterns that felt alive. I told her about my boring office job, how I yearned for something more meaningful. She listened with genuine interest, nodding and making empathetic sounds at the right moments. By the time we parted, I felt a rush I hadn't felt in years. That night, I lay in bed replaying our conversation, hoping I'd see her again soon. Fate took my side, and within days we were texting each other, meeting for coffee, sharing late-night phone calls. In no time, we were dating exclusively. Emily had a gentle sincerity that contrasted sharply with the superficiality I'd grown used to in many people around me. She was the type who genuinely asked, "How are you doing?" and waited for a real answer. I found myself confiding in her more than I had in anyone else. She spoke about her passion for sustainability, her desire to make the world a better place, and each time she spoke, I felt my own aspirations stir. Before long, we were practically living together in my modest apartment, splitting chores, merging our daily routines. It felt so right that I even started contemplating a future with her, marriage, a home, maybe even kids. By the time Derek returned from his grand tour, Emily and I had been dating for several months. I couldn't wait for them to meet. She was excited too, curious about the brother I always spoke so fondly of. We planned a casual lunch at a cafe downtown. Derek arrived, sun-kissed from his travels, wearing a carefree smile and a light backpack slung over one shoulder. He gave me a hearty hug, then turned that same infectious grin on Emily. She blushed slightly, smiling back, and they exchanged small talk about his adventures. I felt a flash of pride that my brother liked my girlfriend and that she was equally intrigued by his stories. There was no hint of malice, no warning sign. We parted that day with a promise to all hang out soon. I left feeling a renewed sense of optimism about my life. Over the next year, Emily and I grew closer. We talked about marriage in a dreamy, not quite official way, discussing what kind of ceremony we might want and whether we'd prefer to own a small house in the suburbs or rent a loft in the city. Derek drifted in and out of town. He'd stay for a few weeks, regaling us with tales from distant places, then vanish again. Sometimes I found him on our couch, entertaining Emily with some outrageous anecdote. She'd laugh, transfixed by his storytelling. A flicker of jealousy would spark within me, but I brushed it away. Derek was just being himself, and Emily was just being polite. She and I were solid, or so I convinced myself. Then came the Tuesday morning that would change everything. I was rummaging through laundry, trying to find a clean shirt, when I got a text from Derek. It read, "Check your email. Important." Strange, because he was supposed to be in Costa Rica. My mind conjured worries, maybe he was in trouble, needing money. I opened my email and found a single unread message in my spam folder with an odd subject line referencing a password reset. Normally, I'd delete such spam, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside, I found a thread of messages, each more damning than the last. They were conversations between Derek and Emily, using code words in places, but laced with enough personal details to remove all doubt. Snippets like, "He won't be back until 6, and, I'm so sorry, I hate sneaking around," leaped out at me. My throat closed as realization hit. My girlfriend, no, the woman I was planning to marry, was cheating on me with my own brother. I sat there for a long moment, stunned. When my trembling fingers finally set down the phone, a cold fury started to seep into my veins. Instead of confronting Emily immediately, I took a measured approach. I spent the day scouring every digital trail I could access. I found more emails, call logs, and even cryptic mentions in Derek's social media posts. The affair had been going on for months. All those times I thought Emily was working late or catching up with friends, she had been meeting Derek. All those moments I had trusted her wholeheartedly, she was lying through her teeth. My heart pounded with betrayal, grief, and a vengeful anger I had never known before. Initially, I wanted to grab my keys, drive to Emily's office, and confront her in front of everyone. But a voice in the back of my mind urged patience. A simple confrontation would let her deny or spin things. It would let Derek claim it was just a fling. They could beg forgiveness or manipulate me. No, I wanted a punishment that matched the magnitude of their betrayal. I would make her lose everything she held dear. Once I had resolved to ruin her life, I moved swiftly but quietly. Each morning, I kissed her goodbye, told her I loved her, and watched her leave with a pang in my gut. The facade was painful, but I told myself it was necessary. In the evenings, I'd ask about her day, cook dinner, pretend everything was normal. My anger burned like a secret furnace, fueling me as I orchestrated the destruction of her professional and financial stability. Her job was the first target. Emily worked for a small but promising design firm focusing on sustainable products. They were on the cusp of a major merger with a larger corporation. Emily was a rising star there, having pitched innovative ideas that impressed her boss. Through a few careful online inquiries and subtle impersonations, I planted seeds of doubt in the competitor's mind and in her current firm's leadership about her loyalty. Anonymous emails claimed that Emily was leaking ideas to rival companies, citing vague, insider information that I knew her boss would recognize. I also used a throwaway account to contact her company's HR department, posing as someone who suspected Emily was secretly job hunting with the competition. Within a week, Emily came home unusually quiet. She mentioned a shift in the office environment, muttering that her boss was acting strange, excluding her from important meetings. I played concerned partner, rubbing her back, encouraging her to talk about it. In truth, I felt a twisted thrill. My plan was working, and it was only step one. Next, I turned to her finances. Emily prided herself on being independent, keeping her own bank accounts and credit cards. She had once rattled off her password as we were paying bills online, and I'd committed it to memory. Accessing her accounts was shockingly easy. I didn't steal money, as that would be too obvious. Instead, I cancelled her credit card under the guise of suspicious activity. Then, I disrupted her auto-pay for the car loan she was close to finishing. A single missed payment might just be an annoyance, but combined with everything else, it would add pressure. Some nights, watching her fret over confusing bank statements, I felt a sick pang of guilt. She looked so vulnerable, her brow furrowed, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. But whenever I wavered, I pictured Derek's smug grin and her smiling face in those emails. I'd remember the time I told her I loved her, and she said it back, knowing she was lying. That rekindled my anger, stealing my resolve. She would pay for shattering my trust. Meanwhile, Derek kept in touch via casual texts or calls, trying to arrange brotherly get-togethers. I stayed vague, playing it cool. I was waiting for the perfect moment to let him know I was onto him. Part of me wanted to watch him squirm, but I needed to stay focused. My main target was Emily. Derek was guilty, but I wanted her to feel the brunt of the consequences first. One afternoon, I noticed Emily sobbing quietly in the bedroom. She tried to hide it when I walked in, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. I asked what was wrong, feigning concern. She explained that her boss had removed her from a critical project and was giving her menial tasks. That her coworkers, once friendly, now whispered behind her back. She didn't understand why. I stroked her hair gently, murmuring reassurances. Inside, I rejoiced. This was exactly what I'd intended. I could almost see the cracks forming in the life she'd so carefully built. Another family gathering loomed. My mother was hosting a casual dinner, insisting everyone attend. Emily dreaded it, knowing Derek would be there. I pretended we needed to go. She didn't fight me on it, probably thinking it would look suspicious if she refused. The night arrived, and we drove to my parents' house in tense silence. The smell of home-cooked food washed over us as we stepped inside. My mother greeted us with hugs, my father offered his usual handshake, and soon we were all seated around the table. Derek was there, flashing his charismatic grin. My anger flared, but I swallowed it. Emily sat beside me, so stiff she barely touched her meal. After dinner, we settled in the living room for coffee and desserts. I waited for the right moment, then signaled for Derek to join me on the back porch. Outside, the air was cool, the sky dotted with stars. He leaned against the railing, hands in his pockets. I let the silence drag on until he shifted uncomfortably. Then, in a calm voice, I told him I knew everything. His eyes widened, panic flickering across his features. At first, he tried to deny it, but my stare was unyielding. He stammered about a mistake, about never meaning to hurt me, about it ending long ago. My fury boiled. I told him not to worry, I wasn't going to expose him tonight. But as far as I was concerned, our brotherhood was dead. His face fell, and I walked back inside, leaving him out there in the darkness to deal with his regret. Inside, Emily noticed my cold demeanor. She tried to catch my eye, but I ignored her. When we finally headed home, we rode in silence. She must have sensed what transpired between Derek and me, but she said nothing. That night, I slept fitfully, my mind whirling with half-formed thoughts. Part of me lamented how everything was falling apart. Another part urged me to finish what I started. Within days, Emily's job situation escalated to a breaking point. A rumor started circulating that she'd leaked proprietary designs to a competitor. She was locked out of crucial projects. When she tried to defend herself, her boss seemed uninterested, unwilling to trust her explanations. In a final blow, she was let go on a dismal Friday. She came home in tears, collapsing on the couch, sobbing that none of it was true. She didn't understand how her career had unraveled so quickly. I feigned shock, holding her trembling body and whispering empty words of comfort. That same evening, she discovered her cancelled credit card and realized her car payment was behind. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of it all. I watched her, a swirl of triumph and pity roiling in my chest. Derek called me repeatedly, leaving messages. His tone sounded frantic, pleading. He said he'd do anything to repair our relationship, that Emily had cut him off, and he feared she was in a bad place. I ignored his calls. I had no interest in hearing him whine. My focus was on ensuring Emily faced the full consequence of what she'd done. Next, I expedited the end of our apartment lease. My name was on the lease, and I claimed I needed to move for a job relocation. The landlord, sympathetic, agreed to let me terminate early. Emily found out about it 2 days later, flipping through her mail. She stormed into the living room, accusing me of blindsiding her, tears brimming in her eyes. I acted apologetic, claiming I'd told her about my new job prospects. She seemed too exhausted to fight. She slumped down, covering her face with her hands. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That night, she broke down completely. She admitted she'd been unfaithful, that she'd fallen for Derek's charm during one of his visits, that they'd spent time together behind my back. She insisted it was over, that she'd realized her mistake, that she wanted me. I stood there, silent, as she wept and begged me to forgive her. My heart pounded with conflicting emotions, love, hate, betrayal, a vindictive satisfaction. I told her I knew about the affair, that I'd known for a while. She sobbed harder, trying to explain, but I cut her off. I said nothing about my involvement in her downfall. Instead, I simply told her we were done. She clutched at my hands, sobbing, pleading for a second chance. I felt my will wavering for a split second, remembering the early days when she was sweet and earnest, the nights we'd laughed together over silly jokes. But the ache of betrayal was too strong. I pulled away, packed a small bag, and left her kneeling on the floor. Rain battered the windshield as I drove, mirroring the chaos inside me. I found a cheap motel and spent the night staring at the flickering neon sign outside my window, turning everything over in my mind. Had I done the right thing? She'd deceived me with Derek, but my revenge had been merciless. I told myself she deserved it. The pain in my chest refused to ease. Over the next few days, I learned she'd attempted to apply for other design jobs, only to find her reputation tarnished by the rumors. I saw her social media posts, desperate pleas for a roommate or a place to stay, references to losing her apartment. Derek's messages kept coming, apologizing, begging me for forgiveness, offering to help Emily if I'd talk to him. I deleted them all. Eventually, I found my own small apartment in another part of town. It wasn't much, just a tiny living room, an outdated kitchen, and a bedroom with peeling wallpaper. But it was mine, a fresh start away from the memories. At night, I often lay awake, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, replaying the events that led me here. I had succeeded in my goal. She lost her job, her money, her security. She lost me. She was left in a precarious state, uncertain and alone. But as the days passed, my sense of triumph diminished. Guilt gnawed at me, especially when I recalled her face streaked with tears. Yet, whenever I felt remorse, I reminded myself of her duplicity, of how she'd smiled at me while sneaking around with my own brother. One day, I returned to our old apartment to retrieve some boxes I'd left behind. The place was nearly empty, the echoes of our past life hanging in the stale air. While I was there, Emily came in. We both froze, standing among the ghosts of what used to be. She looked worn down, dark circles under her eyes, shoulders drooping. She mustered a quiet greeting. I mumbled something back. For a few moments, we busied ourselves with our tasks, trying to avoid each other. Then she spoke. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know it doesn't fix anything, but I truly am." Her voice trembled with raw regret. I stared at the dusty floor, unsure how to respond. The old me might have taken her into my arms, tried to find a path forward. But the new me, jaded by betrayal, just nodded curtly. She left soon after, and I felt a pang that lingered long after her footsteps faded. Time marched on, as it always does. I settled into my new space, started a new job, and watched from a distance as Derek floated around, searching for redemption in his own haphazard way. Emily remained a mystery, occasionally cropping up in social media posts that hinted at her struggles. Some part of me wanted to check on her, to see if she'd managed to land another position, if she was surviving. But pride held me back. We were finished, and I had orchestrated her ruin. That knowledge lay heavy in my chest, an uncomfortable weight I couldn't quite shake. When Derek finally reached me by phone, his voice was strained, remorseful. He insisted he never meant to tear us apart, that it just happened. I listened in silence as he asked if we could repair our brotherly bond. I told him we'd always share blood, but trust was broken beyond repair. He was quiet, likely realizing I meant every word. We ended the call without any resolution, two strangers bound by family but divided by an unforgivable act. In quieter moments, I questioned the aftermath of my revenge. Emily had truly lost everything: her job, her standing, her sense of security, and me. Derek had lost my trust, and presumably her as well. Yet I, too, had lost something. I'd become jaded, suspicious of people's intentions, scared to let my guard down. My victory felt hollow. Sometimes, late at night, I'd recall the warmth in Emily's eyes when she first smiled at me, the silly inside jokes we had, the plans we made for the future. A wave of sorrow would wash over me, and I'd have to remind myself of her betrayal to quell it. Vengeance might have given me control over how she paid for her sins, but it couldn't restore the innocent belief in love I once held. Weeks slipped into months. I decorated my small apartment with minimal furnishings, preferring emptiness to forced comfort. I focused on my job, which offered decent pay and kept me occupied. My co-workers invited me out for drinks, and I accepted sometimes, hoping that a change of scenery would distract me. It worked to a degree, but inevitably I'd come home to a quiet space, my thoughts heavy with memories. Derek's name never came up in conversation anymore, even with my parents. They must have sensed something was amiss but didn't press me for details. The silent gulf in our family widened. I let it, unwilling to speak the truth that their two sons had become enemies. One day, while scrolling idly on social media, I came across a post from a mutual friend featuring Emily in the background. She was thinner, her hair shorter, her expression subdued. The caption mentioned a charity event. Ironically, the same type of fundraiser where we'd first met. A pang shot through my chest. That was how we began, with me awkwardly buying a bracelet and her radiant smile thanking me. Now we were just two wounded people, bound by a past that ended in ruin. I snapped my phone shut, refusing to wallow in sentiment. Another month crept by, and then Derek called again. I hesitated, then picked up. He sounded more somber than before, asked if I was well, if maybe we could at least meet for coffee. He said he missed the days when we were kids, our biggest fight over a baseball card. His voice cracked when he mentioned Mom and Dad, how they worried about why we avoided each other. I closed my eyes, picturing him as a little boy, trailing after me on his tiny bike. For a moment, my anger wavered. But I couldn't bring myself to see him, not yet. I mumbled a non-committal excuse and hung up. The hollow ache returned. A few days later, I tossed out the last of the boxes from the old apartment. Among them, I found a photo album Emily had put together, snapshots of us grinning at the beach, playing board games, trying new recipes. In each photo, we looked carefree, happy. My chest tightened as I flipped through page after page of a life that felt both familiar and painfully distant. I contemplated burning it, but something stopped me. I slid it back into a box and sealed the lid. Perhaps some part of me couldn't destroy those memories, even if they were now tainted. Eventually, I started dating again, though half-heartedly. Dinner conversations with new women felt forced. My guard was always up, scanning for any hint of deception. Sometimes I'd catch myself comparing them to Emily, noticing how they laughed, how they carried themselves, whether their eyes sparkled with the same warmth. Then I'd remind myself I was being ridiculous, that clinging to the past only deepened old wounds. Yet it was a habit I couldn't easily break. In time, I found a woman named Rachel who seemed genuine, with a quiet confidence that intrigued me. We went on a few dates, and I felt a faint flutter of something that might become real. Still, I knew I wasn't ready to fully trust. Rachel sensed my hesitation, but she was patient. Maybe, I thought, patience could heal the damage. Occasionally, I heard rumors that Emily was rebuilding her life, moving somewhere cheaper, picking up freelance design gigs, trying to piece together her shattered finances. A sliver of me was glad she hadn't completely collapsed. Another sliver felt a pang of guilt. But each time I entertained the notion of apologizing, of maybe confessing my role in her downfall, I froze. Would it matter? What we had was gone. There was no going back to who we were before. The best I could do was move forward, even if the path ahead felt lonely. Months slipped into a year. My parents stopped trying to force Derek and me into the same room. They looked pained whenever they mentioned him, as though expecting me to break down or lash out. I offered them only vague reassurances that I was fine. In truth, I had accepted that the brotherly bond we once cherished was irreparably damaged. My new life was stable if somewhat hollow. I kept busy at work, occasionally met with Rachel, and returned to a solitary apartment each night. The intense anger that once fueled me had dulled to a lingering ache. I still dreamed about Emily sometimes, waking with a pounding heart, unsure if the dream had been a memory or a fantasy of a happier ending. Then, in one of those strange twists of fate, I ran into her on a gray afternoon downtown. I was carrying groceries, lost in thought, when I looked up and saw her exiting a building across the street. She noticed me at the same moment, her eyes widening. She hesitated, as though debating whether to approach. Ultimately, she crossed the street. My stomach clenched. Up close, I could see the toll the past year had taken on her. She looked tired, her eyes older somehow. Yet she mustered a small smile. "Hi," she said softly. I offered a nod. We exchanged a few polite words about life, about work. She admitted she'd found a small design contract with a nonprofit. I forced a smile, said I was glad. There was a pause, heavy with things unspoken. Then she thanked me for giving her space. She said she'd done a lot of soul-searching, that she knew she'd hurt me deeply. A flicker of tears welled in her eyes. I felt my guard rise, my emotions tangling into knots. She didn't ask for forgiveness this time. Instead, she whispered that she hoped I was finding happiness, that I deserved it. Her gaze flicked to the ground, then back to me, as if she wanted to say more but couldn't. With a slight nod, I told her to take care. Then we parted, the city street swallowing us both. That was our final encounter. In the days that followed, I grappled with my emotions, uncertain if my revenge had been worth the damage it caused in my own psyche. I had succeeded in toppling her world, and it had filled me with grim satisfaction at the time. But in that moment on the sidewalk, seeing the softness in her eyes, I realized no amount of payback could restore what we'd lost. Vengeance had its price. I was left with a wound that refused to close. Derek remained out of my life, sending occasional updates through our parents, but we never spoke directly. I couldn't imagine trusting him again. Yet a part of me mourned the brother I'd once adored. Time wore on, and slowly, the sharp edges of memory dulled. I found a sense of routine, if not true peace. My new apartment felt more like home, decorated with small touches that reflected who I was now, rather than who I used to be. Rachel and I grew closer, though I was honest about my hesitations. She respected that, never pushing. In small increments, I learned to smile again without bitterness. But on quiet nights, when I gazed out the window at the city lights, I remembered the raw fury I'd felt and how meticulously I'd dismantled Emily's life. That knowledge haunted me, a reminder that I was capable of deep anger and calculated ruin. Maybe she deserved it for betraying me with my own brother, but I couldn't deny how it weighed on my conscience. Eventually, I concluded that life is messy, filled with betrayals and regrets. We all stumble, and sometimes we lash out to protect ourselves or to even the score. I didn't regret exposing what Emily and Derek had done. But I did question the extent of my vengeance. My father once told me that in trying to destroy another person, you often destroy parts of yourself. I understood that now. In forcing her to lose everything, I lost my sense of mercy. I lost the brother I once loved, the girlfriend I thought I'd marry, and a chunk of my own ability to trust. Perhaps that was the true moral of my story: no one emerges from betrayal and revenge unscathed. Even so, I moved forward. Day by day, the memory of what happened receded into a chapter of my life I rarely discussed. Sometimes, I'd pass by a cafe that reminded me of Derek telling his travel stories, or I'd spot someone wearing a bracelet like the one I'd bought from Emily at that fundraiser. A twinge of sadness would flutter in my stomach. Then I'd remind myself that the past was unchangeable. I had to live with the consequences of my actions, just as they had to live with theirs. In the end, there's no neat conclusion, no tidy reconciliation. Emily cheated with my brother, and I made sure she lost everything. That act of revenge fulfilled my anger in the moment, but it also left me with a lingering hollowness. Life went on regardless. I learned to stand on my own 2 feet, forging a path that didn't involve her or Derek. Maybe, one day, I'd fully forgive them. Or maybe I'd just let the memory of it all fade into the background of a life that kept marching forward, whether my heart was whole or not. For now, I could only keep my eyes on the horizon and take each step as it came, carrying both regret and resolution in equal measure, knowing that every action has a price, and sometimes that price is steeper than we ever imagined.